Well, it's another episode of the Khalidiyya show with your hosts Khalid and Khalid.
Welcome
Hope
back.
everyone out there is doing all right. Everyone's doing okay.
Yeah, so it's
Whoever's listening.
We thought we might pick a topic this week that's focused more on the Middle East region, and so
Something that's
we like
fun
to
and
hop.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Another one of those light topics that we like to, fluff pieces that we like to go with.
What could be more hilarious than talking about Iran?
Iran. Yes.
Iran.
We're talking about Iran.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on right now. It's a pretty hot situation going on. So, I mean,
yeah.
Currently there are nuclear renegotiations happening in Vienna. There was just an election. Mm-hmm. And then just, as of, today's as of recording, it's the 27th, and about an hour ago, there was an announcement that there were American airstrikes on Iranian positions in Iraq and Syria. So lots to talk about. Where to begin?
Yeah, so let's start with the nuclear talks and the election. Let's focus on like what's going on in Iran with the election and how that's impacting the nuclear talks, because those are very closely related, obviously. As we know, Trump pulled the US out of the nuclear deal with Iran and I believe it was 4 other countries. And so Biden wants to bring the US back into a deal with Iran, and they're renegotiating the deal. And so those are the talks going on in Vienna. And I think that Biden is using a lot of the leverage that he gained from Trump's being pretty hard on Iran, especially with sanctions. So with the election that just happened, the presidential election in Iran, what's his name, Raisi, the new president, is pretty much a hardliner. He's pretty much a hardliner, which I would imagine means that the Iranian regime is going to try and play hardball and trying to get as much concessions out of any possible deal. They're desperate for a deal. They're hurting economically, really.
Yeah, they need the sanctions lifted. But I mean, it's interesting because I think Biden would like to basically, from what I've read, Biden wants to have basically the same deal that Obama struck, but he wants to keep certain sanctions that are specifically about human rights issues.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, what complicates it, I think, is that the election that just happened, first of all, had the least turnout in any Iranian election,
which is pretty much an embarrassment. The Iranian regime is a pretty like an authoritarian regime, but they do like to play.
No, but their elections are not as farcical as they're not as farcical of elections as in a lot of dictatorial regimes. Like
they're not, but there is a lot of meddling. And
no, but this one. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, the people know that there's a lot of meddling, and so. Like you're right. This instance, there was a lot more of it, and so usually how it works in Iran is that you have a whole number of candidates who want to run, and then the ruling theocratic council, I don't know what they call it, that Ayatollahs sit on, handpick a few candidates that they want, and then one of them is elected.
Yeah, well, what they do is they disqualify people for certain reasons. Like, for instance, Ahmadinejad was going to run again, and they disqualified him. So they just basically disqualified anyone who had the chance of actually winning. So basically, guaranteeing the win for the candidate that they liked. And so, I mean, for just a basic rundown of Iranian ruling structure, you have, the supreme leader, and he makes final decisions on everything. And then you have like ruling council, and then you have, the president. So, the president has a certain amount of power, but the major decisions are made by the supreme leader, which is Khamenei. And if you look back at like the green movement a few years ago, when Ahmadinejad was running for re-election, people contested the election, and the rallying cry in the protests, and it was one of the most massive protests in modern Iranian history. The rallying cry was "Rai men kujast," which means "Where's my vote?" Because Iranians actually do feel they have a vote, which is different from a lot of other, like Arab countries, dictatorial regimes, where everyone knows it's a total farce. There was a certain sense that voting actually matters and elections are real things. And the results of that election and investigation of that election basically came down to the fact that Ahmadinejad actually did win a majority. He won enough votes to win, but they were worried that he wasn't going to win. So they rigged it and like threw in fake ballots. They rigged the numbers, even though they were worried they were going to lose, or they just wanted to make sure that there was no possibility that they could lose. So they rigged it anyway, even though they were already going to win. So that was the last major issue in Iranian elections. This one, like everyone seems to know, because early on they just disqualified everyone that they didn't want to be a candidate. So everyone knew there was only one guy that could possibly win.
Well, I think it's also the reason behind that is that the ruling council and Khamenei in particular are becoming more hard line. They have been leaning more towards the hard line over the past few years, and so you would see a more moderate president get elected.
Yeah,
Every now and then, like
Rouhani was
Rouhani, or what was the other guy's name? I can't remember. He's the name is slipping my mind, but like the guy before Ahmadinejad. But
yeah.
anyways, there are moderates that get elected, but they get pushed around a lot by the ruling council, and in the end, the ruling council really, as you said, makes the big decisions, and then. But overall, I think that over time, with the sanctions, with everything that's been going on, the ruling council and the supreme leader have become more hardline, and so they've been wanting more of a hardline president, and so that they essentially means that they would handpick someone and say it was that he was going to be elected. Because I mean, I haven't ever heard of in Iran that a woman would be running. Well, I don't know if any serious candidates were women. The ones that were allowed to stay till like the very end. Well, there are only like a handful of candidates left. But either way,
their politics, yo-yos. Like you get, they'll allow someone like Rouhani, or I think you were talking about Khatami.
Khatami, there you go. Yeah.
That. Like Khatami was actually a pretty friendly guy, as Iranian rulers go. he was a pretty friendly guy, and because early on, like when the U.S. first invaded Afghanistan, like the Iranian military and defense services actually aided the U.S. in fighting the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
So, Khatami was, and he was really kind of the first real, like, he was trying to break the ice with the US, which, you know, is a rift that goes back to 1953. And I mean, I don't know how much we need to I don't know if we have time and space here to like flesh out that history.
Yeah, yeah, we
But
can talk
let's
about
just
that maybe on another
suffice
episode.
to say that the CIA and British Secret Service, you know, created a coup d'état against a very popular uh, leader that was, you know, progressive, and probably would have been a very good secular progressive leader for the country if he was allowed uh, to run out his term without having the Shah reinstated. But
Mhm.
that's a whole history that, like, the, you know, we don't have time here to get into all the details of that. But it's fun, and there's a guy named Kermit involved. Kermit Roosevelt, which makes it even funnier. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's a lot of funny business that went on in the 50s. Um, you know,
Yeah, there's been a very rough history, and the relationship between Iran and the U.S. has been not a very good one
no.
at all. And so, especially after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and so
Well, I wouldn't even call
yeah.
it an Islamic revolution,
Well,
because
that's
the
what they
revolution
call it
itself
now.
was not Islamic. It became, it was hijacked by Khomeini and turned into Islamic Republic.
Right. I'm
But
just saying
there
that's
were a lot
what
of
Iran.
communists involved in that. That,
Yeah, yeah. It's the official name given by the current Iranian
yeah,
regime.
that's how they would label it.
Yeah.
But like,
So
but this also goes into the history of Raisi, the current president elect, who hasn't taken power yet. Is that part of his record was he ran the judiciary, and
oh,
he oversaw a number of executions of people that were considered enemies of the state, and a lot of them were the Mujahideen Khalq. And the Mujahideen Khalq were, they started actually as a Marxist Leninist, sometimes Maoist, you know, they were basically like communist, opposition group, and, you know, violent, like militant. They blew up a lot of shit um, during, you know, the revolution against the Shah, and then they went up against the, you know, against Khomeini afterwards. And Khomeini did not like the socialists and the communists, and so they rounded them up as they were slow. You know, it took them a little bit of time, but they rounded them up and started executing them. They did, like, you know, these kangaroo courts, and you know, the current president-elect of Iran was one of the judges that oversaw that, and they killed a lot of people. Mujahideen Khalq ended up becoming very, like a kind of cultish, and now they're supported by like Bolton and, you know, other like right-wing figures in the U.S. and Europe as a possible alternative to the Islamic Republic if they ever do a regime change operation.